Our next conversation is one with Secretary Elaine Chao. She's the first Asian American woman to be appointed to a president's cabinet, and she didn't just hold one position, she held two secretary positions as U.S. Secretary of Labor and U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Please welcome to the stage the Honorable Elaine Chao and Matthew Swift, CEO and co-founder of Concordia.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning.
Well, good morning and welcome back to Concordia.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back.
I hope you guys are going to get a real treat.
I think it's impossible to have a conversation with you without starting right away on the nation's travel infrastructure, and especially in the aviation space, where I think it is safe to say that especially over the last few months, it is not up to the standard we need in this country, between delays, enormous data disruptions. Why are we in the middle of this? Why is this happening?
Well, first of all, this is a topic that everybody cares about. I mean, all of you, I'm sure, 90% of you have used 100% of you have used transportation within the city to come here. And then many of you, of course, have used planes to fly to this city. And I would say that every one of us have had some problems with air travel within the last 6 months. It's become the common discussion at cocktail parties. Mm-hmm. And I've been in this field now for such a long time, so much more than I want to tell you. But I was Deputy Secretary of Transportation about 27 years ago, and the same problems were being talked about. Delays and congestions, cancellations, and how do we improve our air travel experience and also just the air traffic system. The air traffic system in America was established at a time when air travel was for about 100,000 passengers. Now that volume has exceeded 1 billion. So we have seen a tremendous increase in the democratization of travel. People, because of lower fares, are able to travel, and we are not seeing the same kind of improvements in the air traffic control system. I want to emphasize that it is safe. It is safe because of the tremendous men and women who man and operate the air traffic control system. But there are about 14,000 air traffic controllers, and they do a great job with equipment that is increasingly outdated, increasingly difficult to manage. They still use, if you ever have a chance to go on the platform of the air traffic control tower, you will see air traffic controllers basically directing traffic using paper strips. At a time like this, they find that to be more reliable. And so we are seeing equipment that is not being updated, commensurate with the requirement. And it's not a matter of money, because we have spent tens of billions of dollars to try to improve the system. And we can go on and ask why that is not happening.
And to shift to the solutions to this, one of the things that you've recently called for is the liberation of the air traffic control system from the FAA.
Yes, I call it liberation because this effort to somehow separate out the air traffic control system from the Federal Aviation Administration, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Transportation, strikes anxiety within travelers. I mean, if you say that, we want to take out air traffic control from the government control, you kind of get a little anxious because this is such an essential part of, what takes care of your safety. And so you think, do we really want another entity to take care of air traffic control? Well, having been in this sector for so long and seeing all the morass, the bureaucracy, the delays in procurement which plague the acquisition of new equipment that would truly modernize the air traffic control system, there really is no other alternative. Because we have been dealing with trying to update and upgrade the air traffic control system for literally decades. And we plow in tens of billions of dollars every year to try to improve the equipment. And it just takes too long. It takes on average about 7 years to get new equipment. Now you all know, you have your desktop computers. If you had to wait 7 years to get an update or an upgrade, I mean, by the time you receive your equipment, it's already out of date. The average age of a computer these days is like 18 months, 6 months, 18 months, and 2 years at the very most. So the procurement process is so bureaucratic and it's so fraught with government processes that by the time that we spend all this money and get the equipment to the air traffic controllers, it's already pretty much
Completely
out of date. Yeah. So
But
they're constantly behind the curve working on equipment that's not most up to date. So I'll give you another example. You all have handhelds, iPhones, Androids have revolutionized the way we get information, how we interact with one another. Air traffic control system do not have a GPS system. They don't have what we have. So they are still relying upon technology that's basically in the 50s and 60s, that has vacuum tubes in some cases, and that don't have the capabilities of a true GPS system. So I'll give you another example. This is one reason why, in an effort to keep safety, planes are kept further apart, because they don't have the most modern equipment. And so the air traffic control system manages plane on a plateau system when it rises, when it ascends, and then on a plateau system when it lands. And so to keep distance that is considered safe, they have to keep a larger distance between airplanes, thereby, in a more congested airspace, creating a less volume and capacity for airplanes. Whereas if you have most current systems, it can be a glide path where planes take off, they go on a glide path, and then they get to 35,000 or 40,000 feet, and then they could be at regular speed. And the same with descending. They go on a plateau that they can't come sliding down. And that means more spacing between airplanes and
more delays, more everything. But I just want to be clear, because this is a pretty bleak picture. You still stand by the safety.
It is safe.
Okay.
Because again, there are many other ways to handle safety. For example, you space the planes further apart. But if you had better equipment, you don't have to space it so far apart, because you can keep track of it. And I'm going to tell you something else that's really going to scare you. But right now,
As we get ready for our flights tomorrow.
They use the radar system. So they track it. It's every minute. They do not track every single second of that minute where the plane is. It sweeps around at regular intervals per minute, and then that's how they track it. Whereas if we have modern equipment, you can track that plane every single second in the air. And so that's another example, indication of where the modern capacity of the equipment is not keeping up with what the air traffic volume requires.
Before we shift to some of the other subjects I know we're going to talk about, very quickly, Congress is currently considering legislation to reauthorize the FAA. And forgive me if this is a stupid question, but can you first...
Not from Matt, never.
Can you first explain why the FAA needs to be reauthorized in the first place? Because I'm not sure a lot of people would know that. But what are the reforms you want to see before that reauthorization happens?
You know, we live in a democracy, and so every entity, except for Social Security, entitlement programs, are yearly funded. And beyond that, they are funded like every 5 years, every 10 years, 7 years. So the FAA, every 5 years, has to be reauthorized. New programs are added, new monies are allotted. And so that's a check and balance of our system. And I was there recently, like 2017, we had one that was the reauthorization before, it was 2018, and now this is the part that's coming up.
Okay.
We had hoped at that time when we were going through our budget that we could have incorporated the idea of having the air traffic control system be created in its own independent status and held in a nonprofit organization with user fees that you now currently pay going to that entity instead of to the federal government, where sometimes it's used for deficit reduction. So we want to have 100% of the monies that you pay into the air traffic control system. It's called the passenger facility tax. That's what the $5 or so, that $5.60 that you get dinged on when you have a plane. Well, that's a passenger facility charge. And others, there are other charges in your ticket that fund the construction, the rehabilitation, the rebuilding of the air traffic control. And right now, that's not going 100% into the system. And so that's another advantage of having an independent entity that will be able to take that money and use 100% of it for its own purposes, for upkeep, for maintenance, for improving operations.
Shifting gears, because I know we have a couple other subjects we want to cover today. You were the first Asian American woman appointed to the U.S. cabinet. In your view today, and the conversations we're having nationally, does the country genuinely resemble the ideas of equality and opportunity, or are you worried we are becoming more and more intolerant as a society here?
Well, I'm in support, and I've come out in support of a National Asian American Museum on the National Mall. There are other museums celebrating the achievements of other groups, and I think it's time for our country to value and celebrate the contributions of the Asian American and Pacific Islander, and now they say Native Hawaiian community as well. I've been incredibly saddened to see the violence expressed against Asian Americans in the beginning parts of COVID. And I think the deteriorating US-China relations has contributed to increasing the antipathy toward Asian Americans, because most Westerners who are non-Asians don't really understand that Asian Americans comprise of a number of ethnicities around the East Asian and South Asian areas. And so they can't tell if someone is a Chinese American or a Burmese American or a Japanese American, Korean American. And so the antipathy toward, because of this US-China relationship tension, are spilling over to all Asian Americans. And Asian Americans have been terribly hurt during COVID. We're a group of many times independent employers, and the unemployment rate for Asian Americans was disproportionately higher than other groups. And I know this because when I was Secretary of Labor, I, for the first time, asked the Bureau of Labor Statistics to chart the employment data of Asians and Asian Americans. And that's how we know that Asian Americans and Asians have the lowest unemployment rate in America. That's usually about 4%. And now it's lower than that, obviously. It's about 2.4%. And then during COVID, it jumped to about 14%, for example, in New York City, because of the disproportionate share of small businesses, self-employed establishments that were put out of business. So because I was so disturbed by the attacks against Asian Americans, I thought there must be something that I can do. And so I threw my voice in support with others, in support of establishing a National Asian Pacific American Culture and History Museum. I'm an optimist in that I think if more people were educated on the contributions of Asian Pacific Americans, that our story is America's story, that perhaps there would be more understanding and less of a view that somehow Asian Pacific Americans are foreigners. We are indeed Americans.
All right, well, thank you very, very much, Madam Secretary. It's great to see you, and thank you for coming back to Concordia.
Thank you.